Welcome, curious minds, to another deep dive.
Great to be here.
Today, we're exploring a story that begins on a date many of us remember for a very different reason, September 11th.
Right, but this isn't 2001 in New York.
No, exactly. For Daniel Silberman, September 11th, 1973, in Chile, that was the day his life was completely turned upside down.
It was the day of the military coup led by General Augusto Pinochet.
And Daniel's father, David Silberman, who was a close ally of Chile's democratically elected socialist president, Salvador Allende.
He became one of the regime's victims. Vanished, kidnapped, right out of prison.
It's a truly harrowing personal story.
It really is. And it's kind of our starting point today, isn't it? To get into this much bigger, more complex web.
Yeah, our mission for this deep dive is to unpack these, well, often hidden connections between the Chilean dictatorship, the United States, and Israel.
We've pulled together articles, some deep research, personal accounts, basically trying to extract the key insights for you.
To help understand how global powers can intersect in ways that are, frankly, surprising and sometimes pretty disturbing.
And often very far from the public eye.
Definitely. So, as we get into this, maybe the big question to keep in mind is this. How does a country that was, built on this profound experience of persecution,
a nation that actually gave Daniel Silberman's family a second chance.
Right. How does that nation become involved in aiding persecutors elsewhere?
It's a tough question, a really challenging one.
And we're going to explore some of the elements today based on the sources we've looked at.
So Daniel Silberman was just 6 years old when the coup happened.
6 years old? Wow.
Living with his family, non-observant Jewish family, in Chuquicamata, up in northern Chile.
And his father, David
Silberman. He was the general manager of the big Calama copper mines there, and a close friend of President Allende.
Daniel described their community as really committed to change, didn't he? Almost like Ben-Gurion in the 1950s.
That's the quote, yeah. Aiming to make the desert bloom. That whole spirit.
But then the coup hit. Immediate turmoil.
And David Silberman, Daniel's father, made this incredibly brave, maybe naive decision. He turned himself in.
Why? What was the thinking?
Well, workers at the mine he managed had been killed. He hoped turning himself in might lead to some kind of clemency, perhaps protect others.
But that's not what happened at all.
Not even close. Instead, he was falsely accused of stealing $13 million.
$13 million?
Yeah. Subjected to a court-martial, no defense lawyer allowed, sentenced to 13 years.
And the conditions?
Terrible. Frequent beatings, electric shock torture. His health just collapsed.
And the family outside?
They were struggling too. Followed by secret police, Daniel's mother couldn't get work. They survived basically by running a small sewing workshop.
But she kept fighting for him, writing letters.
Relentlessly.
Mm-hmm.
And it almost worked. There was this brief moment, a glimmer of hope. A Chilean investigation found his trial illegal.
So amnesty, exile.
Yes, amnesty and exile to Israel was offered. The family was actually preparing to leave. Then, October 4th, 1974. Devastating news. David was kidnapped from prison. Just vanished.
Never seen again.
Never seen again. The family now believes he was murdered that same year.
And they eventually made it to Israel.
Yes, in 1977. But the truth about David, that took much longer.
Not until 1991.
Right. Chile returns to democracy, and a government committee finally admits it. David was abducted by the DNA, the Chilean Secret Services.
And the compensation.
Small financial compensation, but never any real details about what happened to him, where he ended up, just an admission.
Such a painful story. And it took Daniel years, you said, to understand the wider context, the U.S. and Israeli roles.
Exactly. Let's talk about the U.S. involvement first. It's pretty well documented now.
Clinton released documents in '99, right?
Yeah, proving the CIA had intimate knowledge of the coup leaders. They knew who they were, approved of them, even assisted them.
And Nixon had been trying to undermine Allende even before he was elected.
Oh, yeah. Tried and failed in 1970. Once Allende was in power, Washington basically greenlit extensive covert ops to destabilize his government.
So direct contact between U.S. officials and the Chilean military plotting the coup.
Absolutely. Seeking assistance, coordinating, it's laid out in the documents.
And this wasn't just, passive observation. There was that CIA cable.
The one from September 21st, 73. Just days after the coup.
Yeah, saying the military intended to stamp out all vestiges of communism with severe repression. They knew it was coming.
They absolutely knew. Yet fast forward just 6 months, March 74, another declassified CIA cable claims the junta is not bloodthirsty.
Calls the accusations politically inspired falsehoods. Incredible.
It's quite a contrast, isn't it? Especially when you know the reality. At least 5,000 killed, over 30,000 tortured under Pinochet.
And the U.S. support didn't stop there. Operation Condor.
Right. This coordinated effort between 8 U.S.-backed dictatorships in South America, massive human rights abuses across the continent, and the U.S. was supporting it.
Okay, so that's the U.S. angle. Now, where does Israel fit into this picture?
Well, this is where the sources describe a, quote, sordid relationship.
A sordid relationship, okay.
After the U.S. Congress passed an arms embargo against Chile in 1976.
Because of the human rights abuses.
Exactly. Israel basically stepped right into that gap, became a major arms supplier to Pinochet.
And we know this how? U.S. cables again.
Yep. U.S. cables from 1980, 1984 confirm it, explicitly say Israel was undercutting the U.S. embargo.
So selling weapons the U.S. wasn't supposed to be selling?
Precisely. And not just small arms. A 1988 CIA report mentions sophisticated stuff, missiles, tanks, aircraft.
Wow.
And the report notes Israel was unlikely to jeopardize this relationship for, promoting democracy. The arms deals were too important.
For Daniel Silberman, finding this out must have been, devastating.
He described it as shocking and painful, especially, as you said, because Israel had given his family refuge a second chance.
And he mentioned this indifference in the Israeli public.
Yeah, a lot of indifference. He attributed it, or the sources attributed it, to this belief that, Jews have suffered so much they need allies wherever they can find them, no matter what. Survival first.
It creates these conflicting narratives, doesn't it? Like that Haaretz story from 2022.
Oh, the one about Ambassador Moshe Tov, claiming he saved hundreds of people, mostly Jews, back in '73.
Yeah, a heroic story.
It is. But then you look at the declassified telegrams from Tov himself.
Ah.
A very different picture emerges. Tov believed the criticism of Pinochet's regime was unfair. He actively helped, quote, launder Pinochet's image in Washington.
Wow. So the official records contradict the later narrative.
Significantly. And it just highlights how important it is to look at all the sources, especially the contemporary documents, to get a fuller picture. History can be reshaped.
Which is exactly why Daniel Silberman decided to act, right? The lawsuit in 2015.
Exactly. He teamed up with human rights lawyer Itay Mack in Israel, demanding the government reveal its ties to the junta. Full transparency.
And there was that specific detail, the water cannons.
Ah, yes. The affidavit from Eitan Kalinsky, an Israeli citizen who saw them being used in Santiago in 1989.
Israeli-made water cannons?
Yes, made by a kibbutz manufacturer, Hakibbutz Hartzi Hashomer Hatzir. He described them hitting protesters with immense force. A very tangible link.
But the legal fight for those documents, you call it Kafkaesque.
That's how the sources describe it. Just incredibly frustrating and evasive.
Oh.
First, the government says, nope, no correspondence exists.
And they backtrack.
Then they admit, okay, actually, there are 19,000 relevant documents.
19,000?
But fact. They claim they don't have the manpower to redact them for security, suggesting it could take like 70 years to release them.
70 years, basically saying never.
Pretty much. Eventually, a court order forces them to release something. They hand over 12 pages.
12 pages out of 19,000.
And according to Mack and Silberman, they were totally irrelevant pages.
Unbelievable. So they appeal.
Appealed to the Israeli Supreme Court in 2019. The court expressed sympathy, acknowledged the pain.
But declined the case?
Declined to hear it. Cited security concerns. And then, quite remarkably, one judge suggested they approach the Mossad, the intelligence agency.
Implying Mossad has the relevant documents.
That was the clear implication. The information exists, but it's locked down tight due to security claims.
And the fight continues. You mentioned Lily Traubman.
Yes, another petitioner. Her father was also murdered by the junta. She's dedicated to getting this information out.
And she links it to current events?
She does. She points to things like Israel arming the repressive government in South Sudan, saying these kinds of relationships continue to exist.
And that the government uses gag orders and censorship.
To stop the information coming out.
Yeah.
To prevent a real historical accounting, not just for the past, but because these patterns might still be happening.
This really connects to that broader concept you mentioned earlier, the Palestine Laboratory.
Exactly. It's a key concept in understanding some of this, according to the sources we reviewed.
Explain that a bit more. What is the Palestine Laboratory?
It refers to the idea that Israel uses its ongoing conflict with and occupation of Palestinian territories as essentially a testing ground.
Testing ground for weapons, security tactics.
Both. Weapons, surveillance technology, crowd control methods, interrogation techniques, things are developed and refined there.
And then marketed globally.
Precisely. marketed as battle-tested or combat-proven. It's a huge selling point.
And Daniel Silberman connects this to his activism now.
Yeah, he highlights that the profits from this massive arms industry often go to the dealers and the companies, not necessarily benefiting ordinary citizens, and that the industry itself kind of relies on ongoing conflict.
Where does this idea originate? Does it have deep roots?
The sources trace it back pretty far, even to pre-1948 Zionist militarism, weapon development, training under the British.
And then 1948, the Nakba.
Yes, what Palestinians call the catastrophe. At least 750,000 Palestinians forcibly expelled, hundreds of villages destroyed, thousands killed.
And the argument is the lack of accountability then.
Strengthened the belief among some Israeli elites that these methods, these tools of colonization, were not only effective, but perhaps even globally desirable or marketable.
Then came the German reparations.
Huge sums of money in 1952, which heavily funded weapons development, apparently including nuclear capabilities. This, along with French and U.S. aid, really kickstarted the defense industry as a leading export sector.
And the 1967 war was a major turning point.
A watershed moment.
Yeah.
Israel's victory shifted its image. The sources argue this led to a move towards hard-nosed realpolitik. Meaning abandoning what might be called a moral foreign policy in favor of partnering with whoever served Israel's strategic interests, even brutal dictators.
Thomas Friedman wrote about this in the 80s.
Yeah, 1986, New York Times. Despite some limitations, the sources point out, he accurately pegged Israel as a top 10 arms exporter even then, with something like 10% of the workforce involved.
140,000 people. That's a huge number.
It's massive. And Benjamin Beit Halami, writing in 83, observed something interesting about the mindset.
What was that?
He said many Israelis didn't see colluding with dictatorships as dirty work. They saw it as a defensible duty, maybe even an exalted calling for national survival. Very little internal opposition.
And the tested-in-battle idea was explicit.
Oh, very explicit. David Ivry from the Ministry of Defense basically said Israeli tech is competitive because it's tested in battle by the Israeli army. That's the sales pitch.
And today, that industry is enormous.
Absolutely enormous. Over 300 multinational companies involved, 6,000 startups. Record defense exports in 2021, $11.3 billion US dollars.
And cybersecurity.
Israeli firms attracted 40% of the world's funding in cybersecurity in 2021. It shows the scale and the focus. The Palestine Laboratory concept seems central to this economic engine.
So this capability, this industry, it allowed Israel to build relationships across the globe, often with regimes the West wouldn't openly support.
Exactly. The sources describe Israel often acting as a participant, sometimes even an intermediary, for Washington.
Operating where the U.S. maybe couldn't or didn't want to openly, due to Congress, for example?
Precisely. Think places like Guatemala, El Salvador, Costa Rica during the Cold War. Israel could provide arms or training when U.S. channels were blocked or politically sensitive.
You mentioned Latin America earlier, Colombia.
Yeah, training and arming death squads there. Carlos Castaño, a former drug trafficker turned paramilitary leader.
He explicitly credited the Israelis.
In his autobiography, yes. Said he copied the concept of paramilitary forces from the Israelis after he trained in Israel in the 1980s.
And Argentina, during the junta, 1976 to 83, that was particularly brutal.
Horrific. 30,000 Argentinians murdered or disappeared, and chillingly specific targeting and torture of Jews in concentration camps filled with Nazi symbols.
Yet Israel maintained ties, sold weapons.
Despite knowing about the brutality, even the anti-Semitism, yes. The priority, according to the sources, was Argentina's support for Israel regarding the West Bank occupation.
And the excuse about helping Argentinian Jews.
Described as feeble by the sources. It didn't hold water given the scale of the arms sales and the nature of the regime.
That quote from Johanna Ramadi seems relevant here.
The one from 85, about Israel being a pariah state that cannot afford to ask questions about ideology.
Yeah, it really encapsulates that pragmatic, perhaps cynical approach.
It certainly seems to. Strategic needs overriding other concerns. And Guatemala in the 70s and 80s is another, frankly, horrifying example.
That happened there.
Israel provided major support, military, diplomatic, ideological, to a regime carrying out what's been described as genocide against the indigenous Maya population.
You mentioned a listening center.
Yes, installed by Tadiran Israel Electronics Industries around 79-80. A sophisticated computer system capable of tracking huge numbers of citizens, identifying potential dissent.
And the dictator, Rios Montt.
Efrain Rios Montt seized power in 82. He openly stated, "Many of our soldiers were trained by the Israelis."
And his campaign against the Maya. Up to 75,000 killed.
Yes. And Israel provided advice, equipment, training. Some sources claim this was explicitly framed as methods tried and tested on the West Bank and Gaza.
There was even talk of Palestinianization.
Allegedly, yes. Treating the indigenous population similarly to Palestinians, potentially fostering intercommunal violence.
And the Dictatorships massacre.
December 82. Around 300 people slaughtered. The UN Truth Commission's forensic report found ballistic evidence from Galil rifles made in Israel.
Direct link. And that quote from the Israeli advisor.
Lieutenant Colonel Amatzia Shawali, I don't care what the Gentiles do with the arms. The main thing is that the Jews profit. It's quite stark.
Moving beyond Latin America, what about Iran under the Shah?
A very close, though technically secret alliance, described as a true love between two people without their getting married.
What did that involve?
Israel bought huge amounts of Iranian oil. Iran used Israel as a middleman for various things. Crucially, Israel knew the Shah was brutally crushing opposition.
It didn't object.
Expressed no concern, according to the sources. The Israeli Defense Forces trained the Shah's bodyguards. Israel sold Iran planes, tanks, other military gear.
And even urged toughness.
In 1978, as the revolution was brewing, Israeli officials privately urged extreme toughness by the army and the establishment of a military regime in Iran. To protect Israeli interests, of course.
The list just keeps going, doesn't it? Indonesia.
Mossad knew about the 1965-66 genocide there, but afterwards Israel established a secret commercial relationship with the Suharto regime.
Romania under Ceausescu.
Maintained diplomatic ties after 67, when many others broke them off, even though Ceausescu held anti-Semitic views and blocked Holocaust survivors from leaving.
Why?
Apparently, Ceausescu believed Israel and Jewish money ruled the world, and Israel valued his diplomatic backing, however questionable the source.
Haiti under the de Villiers, that was famously brutal.
Papa Doc and Baby Doc.
Right.
Killed tens of thousands, maybe 30,000 to 60,000 people. Israel sold them Uzi submachine guns, armored vehicles.
And even translated a book.
Yeah, translated a book by Papa Doc Duvalier himself, seemingly the curry favor.
And when someone tried to get documents on this recently?
Denied. A 2019 Freedom of Information request. The reason given? Potential embarrassment due to insulting terminology in the documents and fear of aiding the BDS movement.
Paraguay, Nazis and Palestinians.
A bizarre and ultimately failed plan proposed post-67 to resettle 60,000 Palestinians from Gaza to Paraguay, which was then a dictatorship harboring Nazi fugitives like Mengele.
And the Devil's Pack suggestion.
That Israel might have eased off on Nazi hunting in South America as part of the negotiation for this deal. It's a suggestion found in some sources.
Nicaragua too, Somoza, then the Contras.
Armed the brutal Somoza regime right until the end. Then, under Reagan, played a significant role in the war against the Sandinistas.
Supplying weapons.
Including AK-47s that Israel had confiscated from the PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization. Also provided intelligence assistance and training for the Contras, tied into the whole Iran-Contra affair.
It's just example after example of this strategic pragmatism, often aligning with extremely repressive regimes.
It paints a picture of foreign policy driven very heavily by perceived national interest and security needs, often at a high human cost elsewhere.
And Lebanon seems like a particularly stark case study of that cost.
Oh, definitely. Israel's involvement in the Lebanese Civil War from 1975 to 1990. The human toll was immense.
Around 200,000 killed, 17,000 missing.
Those are the estimates, yes. Tens of thousands of civilians caught in the crossfire or directly targeted. One Israeli officer even admitted to arresting countless Palestinians for no reason.
And targeting civilians wasn't hidden.
Not entirely. Former IDF Chief of Staff Mordecai Gur admitted in a 1978 interview to bombing villages without making distinctions between civilians and non-civilians. A deliberate strategy, it seems.
And even this conflict became a showcase for Israeli tech. Drones.
Yes. The CIA was reportedly very impressed with Israel's drone usage in Lebanon in 1982. Saw how effective they were.
Which spurred interest from other countries.
Exactly. Other nations wanted to buy the technology, even though the U.S. had concerns about it proliferating, potentially to, quote, terrorists.
But the human cost. Sabra and Shatila in 82.
A notorious massacre. Up to 3,500 civilians, mostly Palestinian and Lebanese Shiites, killed by the Israeli-backed Christian Phalange militia in refugee camps.
And Ariel Sharon was found responsible.
Indirectly responsible, yes, by an Israeli Commission of Inquiry. A very dark chapter.
Then there was the Kiam prison.
Run from 1985 to 2000 by Israel's proxy militia, the South Lebanon Army, SLA, but with IDF and Shin Bet, the Internal Security Agency, heavily involved.
What happened there?
Horrors. Around 5,000 prisoners, mostly Lebanese Shiites, subjected to electric shocks, beatings, other forms of torture. Israel paid the interrogators, trained them in torture techniques.
And documents confirm this later.
Yes. Declassified documents in 2022 confirm mistreatment, indefinite detention, lack of food. The prison itself was bombed by Israel in 2006, destroying much of the evidence.
Beyond the physical violence, there was this other aspect in Lebanon erasing history.
That's a point raised in the sources, yeah. The interest shown in the PLO Research Center in Beirut.
What was housed there?
Palestinian heritage. Books about Palestine, old land deeds, records, maps of pre-1948 Palestine, cultural memory.
And the graffiti left by Israeli soldiers.
Telling, wasn't it? Things like, Palestinians, what's that? And Palestinians, fuck you. It speaks volumes about perhaps a desire to not just defeat, but erase.
So, pulling back, what are the underlying ideologies that the sources suggest might be driving some of this?
Well, they point to a few interconnected ideas rooted in Zionist thought.
Like Herzl's vision.
Theodor Herzl, yeah. His vision of Israel as a sector of the wall of Europe against Asia, an outpost of civilization against barbarism. This idea of being separate, maybe superior to the surroundings.
And Ehud Barak's metaphor.
The villa in the middle of a jungle, which some critics, cited in the sources, argue reflects a kind of contempt for non-Jews, or at least a deep sense of otherness and threat.
What about the religious or cultural ideas? Chosen people, light unto the nations.
Those concepts are definitely part of the discourse. Figures like Netanyahu, commentators like David Horowitz, invoke Israel as a light unto the nations.
But how does that connect to these actions?
The sources suggest this belief can sometimes be used to justify actions, framing them as necessary for the survival or flourishing of the chosen people, while perhaps diminishing empathy for others, particularly Palestinians.
And that quote from Chaim Herzog, the former president.
His simple foreign policy criterion, is it good for the Jews?
Which Noam Chomsky criticized.
Yeah, Chomsky pointed out that this focus ignores the impact on others, especially the conquered population, as he put it. It frames policy solely through one group's interests.
It's a really complex mix, isn't it? History, ideology, security fears, economic drivers, pragmatism.
Absolutely. And it leads to the question, where does this leave things today? Is this all just history?
What does Itay Mack, the lawyer, say?
His assessment is pretty stark. He says, not a lot has changed in Israel's defense sector over the decades.
The interests are the same. The lack of accountability.
That's his view. Its interests and carelessness about human rights and lack of accountability are the same. And he stresses the fight for transparency is vital.
Not just about the past.
Right. Not only because of the cliche that history is repeating, but because Israel is using gag orders and censorship to stop information coming out, implying these issues are ongoing, actively managed.
And that brings us toward the end of this deep dive.
Yeah, we've really covered a lot of ground.
We've explored these complex, often shadowy relationships Israel forged with Chile, Argentina, Guatemala, Iran, and many others.
Driven by this mix of economics, strategy, ideology.
And often, as we've seen, at a tremendous human cost.
It definitely leaves us with something to think about.
A final provocative thought for you, the listener, to ponder. How does a nation's foundational story, born from persecution, seeking security, how does that square with a foreign policy that so often aligns with oppressors?
And benefits directly, it seems, from conflict through this battle-tested arms industry.
What does it mean for the future when that historical truth is hard to access and this approach to security, this realpolitik, remains so central?
Something to definitely mull over.